We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! Here is the part 3 of What If Naruto Was in Elden Ring. I've found and fought my fair share of gods before. Never been a fan of them. They meddle and mangle everything. Who needs them? It's the strength of your spirit that matters, not them. I don't need any blessings, nor gods, or any of that. Go ahead. Shed no grace on me. I'll still fix this rotten world, one soul at a time. I'll save em all. Just you watch. Narutoxharem. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 7, Festival of War. Millicent was awake. Naruto noticed at once, if only because he'd been keeping an eye on her as they neared the castle. It wasn't out of distrust, but rather, concern. For reasons he couldn't quite comprehend, Melina didn't seem much fond of the once-rotten girl. Indeed, she went well out of her way to avoid any and all mention of their resident redhead. Almost as if she knew her. Wouldn't even walk near her at that. He sensed a story lurking there, but now wasn't the time for such things. Please, water. Definitely thoughts for later, because once Millicent stirred atop Torrance and began begging for a drink, he couldn't help himself. He hastened to her side, canteen in hand, even gave her what remained of his field rations to chase down the lukewarm liquid as best he could. She ate sparingly, not once protesting, even when he helped her out the saddle and lowered her to the dirt. No surprise there. Poor thing must have been exhausted. Not so exhausted to ignore him, however. The second he set her down she raised her gaze, golden eyes pinning him. You quelled the scarlet rot, more or less. Naruto quirked a brow. Good afternoon to you, too. When the recovering redhead sputtered to that effect, he craned his neck back, searching for another maiden. Hey, Melina. Any chance you could get me a... She was already gone, vanishing back into the ether from whence she'd come. He clicked his tongue and glared at the fading motes of light. Sheesh. Who put a bee in her bonnet? She's awake, then. Greyroll made a tooting noise behind him. Good. I shall scout ahead and inspect this fortress while she gets her bearings. A rueful chuckle escaped him. Pretty sure Melina called it a castle. She shrugged. 'Tis all one and the same to me, and if the gate ain't open, her eyes flashed, cat-like slits narrowing in draconic glee. Then I shall knock it down. Come Xikes. Let them have their moment. Having said her piece, the mother of dragons sashayed off, leaving her looming son to lumber after her apace. Xikes paused a moment to regard Millicent with a giant eye. Abruptly it leaned forward and gave her a soft nudge with its snout. Soft for a dragon, that is. Millicent squeaked and nearly fell over. Naruto barked a laugh and kept her upright. Don't mind him. He's a friendly fella once you get to know him. This is friendly, sure is. He ran a hand over the young dragon's mending scales, then gave it a nudging, sending the massive beast stomping after its mother. See? He's a good boy. I beg you forgiveness. Millicent's face flushed at the last as it plodded away. My apologies for fainting before I could thank you. It's just as you said. The rot, it has ceased to writhe. She reached up to grip her restored arm, seemed shocked to remember it was still there, then comported herself enough to continue. I may not understand it, but all the voices in my head are silent. Even the nightmares have abated. A fresh spot of color hit her cheeks and ducked her head anew. I slept like a babe, I'll say. A laugh burst from his lips. You were out for a while. Once again, her pale visage darkened with color. 1,000 apologies, don't be embarrassed, it's fine. He patted her head without thinking, heedless of the curious noise she made. How are you feeling? Better. She frowned but a little when his palm pulled away. Though I can scarcely believe it, I can move as I please. She rubbed her wrist again, doubtless to make certain it was still there. It is all thanks to you. Was that adoration in her eyes? Naruto wasn't sure how to feel about that. The young warrior clearly respected his efforts, but he still couldn't bring himself to look her in the eye and meet the awe there. It wasn't as if he'd done anything particularly noteworthy, Anybody would have done the same. No, she shook her head, red locks swaying. You saved me. I will not forget that, so long as I live. She frowned when several strands of hair tickled her nose. Could you perhaps? Sure. With deft movements and a bit of cord, he helped her bind her hair back into a loose bun. My thanks. With her crimson locks out of the way, she looked even more human than before. I'll never be able to repay you at this rate. No problem. Just be careful and try to avoid any sudden moves. He almost didn't want to say it, but he had to warn her all the same. I'm not sure if I got all that crap out. Millicent gasped and glared at her arm as though it had betrayed her. For a wild moment she looked as though she might cut it off again. The rot still remains within me. Even now, only a little. He made a pinching motion with his thumb and forefinger to reassure her. If it comes back, I'll wipe it out, same as before. Her face lit up, and not for the reasons one might expect. Oh. She squirmed beneath his gaze, knees twisting in thinly veiled agitation. I see, so you'll do that again. Naruto sputtered at the memory. If I have to. Millicent didn't make a sound. Her flustered expression spoke for her. Silence reigned anew. Surprisingly, it was the redhead who finally usurped it. There is no way I could ever truly repay you, but, a hand dipped into the pouch at her side, I would like you to have this, by way of thanks. Out came her hand, clutching a golden medallion in her palm. A mere trifle it might be, but it would mean the world to me if you were to take it. Trembling fingers pushed it into his own. Consider it a token of my appreciation. On a whim, Naruto reached for it. Just holding it made him feel stronger. Strength he didn't necessarily need. What was the point in having more power? Without so much as a second thought, he pushed it back into her hands. You keep it. Millicent flinched. I beg your pardon, you need it more than me. His fingers closed around hers, forcing her to hold fast to the medallion. I'm tough enough without it. She tried to give it to him still, but he wouldn't have. It. I really don't need. Yes. You. Do. He stepped back and crossed both arms before his armored chest to rebuff her attempts entirely. You're still recovering, and I ain't gonna take away something that will help you. A grimace stole over his face as he remembered just where they were headed today. You'll probably need it in the days ahead. That spurred a different reaction in the recovering redhead. You sound as if you're marching to your death. Her lips pursed into a thin line when he didn't deny the possibility. Just who do you intend to face here? Naruto told her in no uncertain terms. Why not? He gained nothing from refraining and everything for being honest. Unfortunately, said honesty immediately sent Millicent spiraling down into a right and proper panic. You wish to fight General Radahn? Something sparked in those rotten golden eyes. Alone? Probably not if Greyroll has anything to say about it, but I will if I gotta. Millicent climbed unsteadily to her feet. Allow me to aid you, then. Yeah, no, he shook his head. You just woke up and all. Her eyes met his. I will aid you. Don't discard me, her expression seemed to say. Don't cast me aside. Let me be of use to you. Please. I can't bear it. Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose. Pushy redheads. Kurama was of no help at all whatsoever here. He wanted nothing to do with this and thus chose to stay silent. Which in turn left the onus of choice with him. He could hardly afford to turn Millicent out into the wilds as she was now. She might catch the rot a second time and then where would he be? No, he couldn't turn her away. She'd probably follow him in any case. She seemed the sort for it. He stepped to her and grabbed her by the shoulder, sending another pulse of chakra through her body to strengthen her further. Millicent jumped with a yelp, one that was overshadowed by his words. Fine, you win. But stay close. I mean it. She ducked her head a touch and nodded. As my lord wills. Lord? Naruto poked himself in the chest. Me? That is what you are. The fervent belief in her words, the gleam in her eyes, startled him more than anything else he'd seen in this world. Only a lord would go so far as to help a perfect stranger, let alone convince an eclectic band of such as this to work together in pursuit of a common goal. And you bear a great rune, do you not? He touched a hand to his chest, where Godric's rune even now pulsed with life. Well, you're not wrong on that front. Do you perhaps have a weapon I could use? She pressed her advantage before he could think to challenge her other account. I would prefer a longsword or a katana, if you have such. Didn't he have one of those? Naruto turned, regarding the bundle on Torrent's bag. He'd scrounged through a few the battlefields they'd passed, leaving his steed's saddlebags full to bursting. She didn't seem the sort for a great sword, and a short sword probably wouldn't be enough for someone like her. Gimme a sec. It was the work of moments to find something that would suit her. He'd stumbled upon it by chance when some maniac attacked him near a cave. If it had a name, he didn't know it. He pressed a slender katana into her hands. Millicent accepted it, unsheathed the blade, and cut a quick slice through the air. A blade of light burst forth to annihilate a nearby boulder with ease, leaving its severed halves to slide apart and crash down into the rot-ridden dirt. Naruto blinked. Curious, she sheathed it again and repeated the process twice more, producing an arc of blue transience each time. This is Moonveil. She whispered quietly, sheathing it for the final time, an ancient glintstone blade forged by a Celian sorcerer in times long past. Where did you find this? Naruto shrugged. By chance. Her gaze met his. No one's that lucky. Maybe I am. He offered a selfsame smile. Dunno what to tell ya. This is a fine blade. I gladly accept it. Only, abruptly, she flushed anew. Would you mind averting your eyes for a moment? Now what was she up to? Still, he sensed no ill intent and complied, presenting his left side to her as he looked away. All right, there. Why'd you want me to do this? Something warm, soft, and infinitely yielding touched his right cheek. Little more than a feather's brush, a lingering touch, it nevertheless startled him all the same. When he looked back, he found Millicent kneeling hastily before him, head bowed, one fist pressed against her bosom, eyes fixed firmly on the road underfoot. Kurama perked up. Would you look at that? I've decided that I would rather trust you than simply continuing to spoil from within. Millicent's words were faint, almost a whisper, cheeks burning brighter than her hair. I had expected to die, to simply rot away, to be little more than a footnote in history. You changed that. And yet, though it shames me, I fear I must ask another boon of you. Her eyes met his, damp with unshed tears. Please, I beg of thee, take me into your service. Naruto's brow shot into his hair. Wanna run that by me again? I wish to aid you in your quest to become Elden Lord. The former amputee spoke quickly, hastily, even nearly tripping over herself in her haste to explain for fear of him denying her. Let me be your sword, your shield, your shadow in all things. As he looked on aghast, Millicent planted that fist into the dirt and bowed her head anew. I would protect you from all those that would do thee harm. Sullied though I am, I promise to uphold your vows, your morals, all that you are. And someday, this she added in a voice so faint even he had to strain to hear it, those that come after you. Oh. 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 Naruto's brain fizzled out when she didn't finish that sentence. How did one respond to a proposition like this? No, how could you respond? Help, please. Not a chance. Kurama snickered, grinning from ear to ear. You're on your own here. Have fun. His right eye began to twitch. Stop that. And so he spat out the first thing that came to mind, you're not sullied at all. Stand up. You can help me if you want, but don't go throwing yourself in the dirt. Her head rose tentatively. Will you accept my into your service? She wasn't going to get up until he said yes. Naruto just knew it. What did Shikamaru always say? Such a drag. Yes, sure, fine. He looked away, palming his face to hide burning cheeks. Now get up. Come on. You're embarrassing me. He felt a fierce flare of joy from the redhead as she climbed to her feet, one so powerful it threatened to take his breath away. For a singular moment she shone to his senses because of that singular emotion. She caught it and tamped it down quickly, composing herself, but he couldn't forget what he'd seen. Pure girl. His mind bleated. Must protect. Then my sword is yours. Millicent straightened with a smile, all but glowing with pride. I promise, you shan't regret this. Although, she took a small, shy step toward him. Into his personal space, and touched a hand to one breast. I wonder what this feeling is. I feel oddly warm. Naruto's heart leaped into his throat. She was close. Too close, bring with her the scent of herbs. It was not an unpleasant aroma. A triumphant shout shook the world, followed by a distant plume of dust. Millicent blinked. Once. Twice. Thrice now. Whatever was that? He heaved a sigh, almost disappointed by the distraction. Ha! Guess Greyroll found a troll. Champions welcome. Of all the greetings Naruto had expected in the courtyard, those were not among them. Greyroll had been true to her word. By the time they'd caught up, the gate guard lay dead and the castle gates were ripped asunder to grant them passage. Well, most of them. Lacking a human form, NeonZangetsu was forced to wait outside while they conducted their business within. He'd make a fine guard if anyone tried to creep up on their flank. Even so, no such ambush was forthcoming, for none barred their entry. The stars have aligned. Now they knew why, as a man's voice boomed out as they entered the plaza. The festival is nigh. Sure enough, his keen eyes spotted a masked man hoisting a flamberge high atop one of the ramparts well above them. His very voice brimmed with gusto. General Radahn, mightiest demigod of the Shattering, awaits you. Millicent tilted her head to regard the bevy of warriors awaiting them within, some spectral, others mercifully solid. Seems a strange place to hold a festival. 'Tis a human right. Greyroll groused, lips pursed in a thin line as she glared at a giant jar. Thy kind has always been known for such foppery and finery. We dragons celebrate in a different fashion. Naruto couldn't help but quirk a brow at that. How so? Her hip brushed his in a telling fashion. Perhaps I shall show thee sometime. Millicent bridled in the corner of his eye, but said nothing. He knew she'd have words for her later. Mercifully, Melina manifested between them. They could snap at one another. You should see the festivals in the capital, dragon. The bite in her words had him drawing back. They would put your petty rituals to shame. Greyroll glared golden daggers at her, but with her ire thus diverted, Millicent took her chance and stuck to his side. Champions prepare for battle. Once more, the Castellan's voice rang out above them, diverting their attention for the umpteenth time. Defeat the general. Claim glory and grab that great rune. His words peaked low with fervor bordering on mania now as he addressed the scattered souls standing before them. Such is our celebration of war. The Radahn festival. Naruto scratched the back of his head, feeling more than a little chagrined. Guess we've got competition. Understatement of the century, there. He counted nearly a dozen stalwart men and women assembled in the plaza. A man wearing what he thought was a wolf's mask, a giant jar, a big brute in armor, a maiden clad in thin cloth. The list went on and on. He could have sworn he saw a samurai among them too, but surely that wasn't possible. Why would one of Mifune's people be here? Never mind that, how many people were after this great rune? The low whinny of a horse cut through his thoughts. Naruto pivoted toward it, only to find himself somewhat caught out when he failed to find the source. That noise hadn't come from Torrent. The spectral steed was enjoying a well-earned rest outside with NeonZangetsu. And besides, this sounded bigger. Much bigger. Now who did he know that rode a giant horse? An answer smacked him upside the head. In the same instant, a long shadow fell over him from on high. A familiar shadow, one he knew all too well. Melina manifested not a stone's throw away, head tilted a fraction of an inch. Ah! Was her sole exclamation. 'Twould seem she caught up. That was Naruto's only warning. Someone crashed down into the plaza directly behind him, startling every champion in the plaza. Dust kicked up and he flung up an arm against it as his hood was blasted back. Squinting into the haze, he beheld a mighty steed, and a mightier shape even now clambering off its back. Dull gold armor glimmered in the light of the Erdtree, contrasting harshly against the crimson sky of Caelid. A familiar grunt had his hackles rising. Then she was upon him. He barked out a laugh, knowing what was coming. Trish! Don't you dare! Too little, too late. The last word was only just leaving his mouth when a golden arm got hold of his ankle. Not a heartbeat later, he found hoisted himself into the air, all but dangled upside down like a child's toy. Blue eyes fluttered in a brief blink, gazing into that wrathful helm and the scowling face within. Hey! He managed a Cheshire grin. Mind putting me down? The tree sentinel poked him again, checking him over for wounds. Hey! He laughed. Not in front of my friends. Ow! I missed you, too. Did you really ride all the way out here? She must have. Melina confirmed his suspicions as she reappeared only a stone's throw away, looking faintly bemused by his plight. I lack the strength to bring her with me. The tree sentinel made a decidedly unimpressed noise at that and waffled a golden hand in the Maiden's general vicinity. For her part, she paid her little heed. Naruto winced at the fire there. Look, I really am sorry, but I didn't think I'd get yoinked back in the round table, you know. Greyroll tilted her head. 'Twould seem you don't lack for interesting company. However did you tame her? Bit of a long story there, and I didn't tame anyone. Then how did she enter in your service? Millicent was giving the sentinel a rather odd look as well, all the while gripping her restored wrist. Leave it to her to focus on that. Another thought occurred to him as he dangled there. Her arm. Hey, that's right. I can heal you now. Almost forgot. Slipping out of the Trish's grasp, he caught himself in a crouch and took a step forward, moving well into her personal space. Just take your helmet off and I can fix you right up. NeonZangetsu. The tree sentinel made a noise that couldn't be anything other than a denial. A golden gauntlet slapped his chest, forcing him back a piece. What the heck? When she shook her head, setting the plume atop her helm swaying, understanding dawned. You don't want me to. She made a less than pleasant gesture across her throat, prompting a frown from him. Oi! I still can't understand you. With a long-suffering sigh the sentinel snatched a stray dagger off a nearby table. Dragging its rusty edge, she used it to carve words into the dirt at their feet. My penance. Don't waste your strength on me. Not worthy. Indignation sparked in his soul. Screw that. I've got plenty of chakra left. Now off with your helmet. Trish shook her head anew, for all that good it did her. A quick step and a hop and he had hold of her helm. A twist of his wrists tore it free, revealing her wide eyes to the world. More than a few champions winced when they beheld her ruined visage. Millicent hissed. Greyroll actually made a rare noise of sympathy as she saw her scars. Even as she did, the tree sentinel slammed back, furiously shaking her head. It's not gonna hurt, I swear. Naruto stepped after her. Here, just hold still. Melina laid a hand on his wrist. Now is not the time. Surely she has a reason for resisting you so. Perhaps you should wait until after the battle. Naruto nearly protested, until he saw the look on Trish's face. Although she loomed over the lot of them, she suddenly looked fit to bolt. No, she was afraid. Terrified. Not of him, but something else. What, then? What had her so spooked that she wouldn't accept healing? In the end, he chose to heed Melina's advice. Just this once. He'd seek the Sentinel's secrets after Radahn was dealt with. Here. He tossed her helm back and stalked up the steps. I'll be having words with you when this is over. Stay put, you know. I'll be right back. Without pausing to see her reaction, he left the lot of them behind to have words with the Castellan. It was as much an excuse to get away from the look in her eyes as anything else. He couldn't bear to see Trish wearing an expression like that. Imagine his surprise then, when he found the man waiting for him atop the rampart. Aha! It seems we have a Goddelsayer among us. Despite his aged mask, the man beneath it all sounded heartened as he turned to meet him. Come to grab another great rune, have you, young chum? There was something almost merry in that affable voice that both made him lower his guard and tense in the same instant. You know me. I know of you, rather. The Castellan cackled merrily. I didn't think the Slayer of Godric would grace us with his presence. Ah! Seemed word had gotten out after all. Why does everyone know about that? Lad, you're the first tarnished to hold a great rune since Vike, may the stars smile upon his sorry soul. The aging warrior made a strange sign before his own chest, nodded, then jerked a gloved thumb toward Naruto and the pulsing golden-green shard even now beating near his heart. But I'm afraid you'll find no easy prey here. Godric was the runt of the litter, I know. He felt an old anger overtake him. Why speak ill of the dead? Whatever he'd once been, he was gone now. The others will be stronger, yada yada yada. I've heard it all afore. And you are. Call me Jaren, lad. Quick bow of that bearded mask. I imagine you have questions about the good general. I do. He certainly did. It was why he'd come up here in the first place. Who is Radahn? What's he like? Was he another Godric? Another monster to be put down? He hoped not. Allow me to paint you the full picture. Jiren swung an arm out past him, towards the wailing dunes below, where monuments of blades and banners stood etched within. General Radahn was, and still is, a mighty warrior, strongest demigod of his generation. Now, he is cursed ever to wander. Eaten from the inside, by millennia's scarlet rot, his wits are long gone. His voice dipped in rare melancholy, head hanging just a touch before he recovered himself. Now he gathers the corpses of former friends and foes alike, gorging on them like a dog, howling at the sky. A baleful roar echoed from the dunes. Naruto swallowed despite himself. So he's lost his mind? Long ago. Jiren didn't even sound sad to say it anymore, just resigned. But now we must make merry, he righted himself as he looked on, for the time has come to give him his rest. Quick as a flash the Castellan pivoted back to Melina and the others below, hoisting his flamberge high once more. O gathering of champions, the revels begin. Our celebration of war. His sword crashed down, splintering the wood beneath him with a sonorous crack. The Radahn festival. Color me surprised. Didn't think the old coot would be that honorable. Go now, said Old Soul, straightened up. Speak with the others. Make your preparations. It will take a great man of you to stand even a slim chance against our commander. Naruto pivoted, stifling a second sigh of his own. Don't have to tell me twice. Jiren called out to him before he could take a single step. Boy, he stilled. Yeah, give him a good battle, won't you? Naruto reached up and tugged at his headband. I'll do my best. Alexander perked up the moment he saw them. How could he not? This was to be a festival of champions after all. And these were a sterling sword indeed. Nor was he the only one to take notice of them. Faralina was but a humble finger maiden. She didn't consider herself particularly strong compared to some of the heroes here, but she was well versed with incantations of the Golden Order and quick on her feet. Such was expected of her naturally, for she served the will of the two fingers, bringing their grace and guidance to all whom cared to listen. And one day, someday soon, she would share that strength with her tarnished. She still hadn't found him or her, yet, but Faralina was certain she would eventually encounter her destined one. The two fingers had promised her, after all. Such was the guidance of grace. She just hadn't searched in the right places. Yes, that was it. Long had she scoured high and low, following rumors all about the lands between, hoping in vain. Until finally, she stumbled upon an odd man known as Silivis. Such a strange wizard that one, but he'd proven himself a relatively trustworthy sort thus far. T was he who took her in when she was starving, T was he who first told her about this festival, T was he who even offered her a potion to help her on her quest. She would have gladly taken him up on the ladder, but she did not wish to be indebted to him any further than she already was. And so she had kindly refused the tonic he offered and taken her leave with great thanks, promising to return if she failed to find her intended here. She must succeed here. She did not wish to impugn upon his generosity any longer. Surely she would find her tarnished in these grounds. 'Twas a tournament of champions, after all, sure to attract tarnished far and wide. Doubtless some already had maidens of their own, but surely there was at least one here without, one person who could fulfill her purpose, make her feel complete. Come on, Melina. The voice of a young man plucked her from her misery as surely as a bird would a worm. It'll be fine. 'Twill not be fine. A woman snapped back. I'll not see you herring off again without a plan. Drawn by these words the young finger maiden pivoted, seeking their source. Imagine her surprise then, when her eye fell upon a strapping young blonde being fussed over by not one, not two, but 4 women. Clad in amber drake-scale armor, he stood apart from the rest not solely for that, but for his aura alone. Fair of face was he, with striking blue eyes and whiskered cheeks even now dimpled in a sunny smile. But what truly drew her attention was the great rune pulsing in his chest. As a finger maiden Faralina recognized its make at once, for the wisdom of the fingers was always with her. 'Twas the rune of Godric. There could be no doubt. Ah! She understood now. Like so many others, this one sought the rune of Radahn. Faralina couldn't abide that. She needed that great rune. With one such as that, she could find her destined tarnished. The other shard-bearers were out of reach or otherwise beyond her meager means to find. But here, if she had help, here, with numbers on her side, she had her chance. Her best chance. Her last chance. Her only chance. The blonde blinked suddenly, regarding another competitor. That is a big dog. Half-wolf, actually. The being retorted. He talks? Faralina almost found herself smiling despite herself as the two struck up a rapport. Was that the half-wolf blade, Shadow to Runni? The two fingers might be pleased to learn of his location when next she visited the round table. Still, her eyes strayed to the woman near the blonde as the duo conversed. A dragonkin woman bickered with a redhead, while a towering woman in golden armor glared bloody daggers at a lass bearing one eye. Oddly enough, the other looked to have been sealed by something. The other was fixed firmly on the blonde. That last thought tore at her heartstrings. She had the look of a maiden, which meant the blonde wasn't the one. He'd no need of her. If he already had a maiden tending to his every need, he would not take a second. Rare was the sword who did such, and rarer still the blonde that persisted as two maidens fought over a single tarnished. And yet, Faralina turned her gaze inward. She could feel the strength of runes lingering about him, a great many of them. Hundreds, no, hundreds of thousands, untapped power jet waiting to be unleashed at the right moment. Surely if he had a maiden, all those runes would have been turned to strength long ago. But he hadn't used any of them. Not a one. What, then, did that mean? A tiny, timid hope bloomed in Faralina's heart. Did he not have a maiden after all? He looked her way suddenly, no doubt sensing her gaze. The moment their eyes, Faralina averted her own and managed a polite bow. He returned it with an awkward wave. By the time she looked up, he was distracted yet again. Thank the fingers for small mercies. She couldn't bring herself to speak to him. No, nay, not yet. She dare not approach, not now, not when he was surrounded by so any, certainly not with that giant jar trundling their way. To approach him now would only see her swept up with the others, one voice lost among many. But perhaps, yes. After the battle she would try. If she lived. If Radahn didn't slay her. So many ifs. She just had to survive. There he is. Naruto saw a giant shape across the dunes, a great hulking warrior that dwarfed them all. The distant figure of Radahn moved with impossible speed. An arrow hurtled their way. Millicent yelped. Radahn feasted. He bent low to the ground and gorged himself on another would-be champion, tearing great strips from their flesh with his teeth alone. His teeth scoured rotten flesh, managing little more than a few middling bites before he had his full. His meal secured, he reared back and howled at the sky. Kill and eat. Eat and kill. He killed and he ate. He ripped and tore. It was all he was. All he knew. All that he could do. Sometimes there were moments in which he despaired, brief seconds of sanity that surfaced once every decade or so. Even now in his mad state, his body falling apart, his organs rotted, his instincts yet remained. His addled mind still clung to three precious tenets, even now. They anchored him. Must not eat Leonard. Leonard was horse. Horse was good boy, all he had left of his family. Hold back the stars. Do not let them fall. Never let them fall. And above all, fight. Fight, so that he might end. So long as he held the stars back, the world would be safe. Someone had told him that once. A man with red hair. He no longer remembered who. There were monsters in the stars. Beasts that came from the void, cruel creatures who loved not and knew only destruction. So long as he held the cosmos in check, all was well. But there was another Ryauzen, wasn't there? And Runni would be safe. Runni? Who was Runni? He no longer knew. There. Movement in the dunes. The moment fizzled out and Radahn righting himself, reaching for his great bow. A giant hand ripped 3 spears from his skewered back and took aim. 'Twas a simple action. Gravity magic flared, forming a distant nebulae at the tip of his arrow as he drew the string back yet further. His eyes saw much, even at this distance, chief among them a woman with stark red hair. The rod in him stirred at the sight, seething like the frenzied flame itself. Radahn recalled a woman with such flaming locks. Rotted though he was, his body knew well the face of the one who had brought this blight upon him. Malnia. Blade of Miquella. Rotten, dishonorable witch who couldn't bear to take a loss. And now she was come again, come to mock him, taunt him, torment him. Her fault. All her fault. He loosed the arrow with hate in his heart. Straight and true did it fly, crossing the distance in an instant before they could hope to react. A cry of pain reached his ears. One down. He could see dark shapes racing across the sands toward him now. Radahn roared a challenge at them. Something roared back. Radahn. A man's voice ripped through the wailing dunes, a shockwave of sound tearing across heaps of broken weapons and moldering bones to reach him. And for the first time since the rot had come upon him, Starscourge Radahn quivered. But not in fear. Nay. He shuddered for an altogether different reason. 'Twas a brief momentary thing, but it gave his prey time enough to speak again. I came here to face a champion. His voice was fire and death, hope and light incarnate. I am still waiting. Come and get me. Unless you're afraid. Raiden's heart sang. Those words. A worthy foe. A good death. An end. At last. Long had he waited. The last broken scrap of his mind howled, and as he did, he heard the challenger howl back. Something stirred in him as he spurred Leonard forward with all due speed. Stowing his bow, he drew his blades and howled at the sky. A glorious battle. An end. That was all he wanted. Finish me, please. Ow! Naruto hissed furiously as he ripped the great arrow from his shoulder. It went unwillingly, worsening his wound, but he grit his teeth and forced it free fro his flesh. Blood spattered the sands, drawing a fair share of gasps fro his companions. He shut his ears to them. Not a small wound by any means or measure, but what choice did he have? If he hadn't shoved Millicent aside at the last moment there, that would be her skewered in the sands. He could take a hit like this and laugh it off. She couldn't. What was one more scar by comparison? Had to be him. He could tank things like this. He could live. My lord. That wound. At his flank, he was vaguely aware of Millicent fretting over him, his sword fingers running down the length of his arm. Bless her simple soul. He patted her shoulder with a smile and let her haul him upright. Truth be told, her help wasn't needed, but it was pivotal that she felt useful. If even a single arrow struck Millicent, she would die. She didn't have Trish's armor, nor did she possess Greyrol's draconic vitality. She couldn't vanish into the ether and hide like Melina either. Fine. Just gimme a second. Forcing chakra to the wound was easier than ever before. Almost effortless. Godric's rune had empowered every aspect of him, regeneration included. An injury like this would close in a few minutes. Hardly enough to slow him down, even if it did enrage his companions. Trish took one look at his wood, snarled, and leaped onto her mount. Greyrol raced barefoot into the dunes beside her. Most of the others followed their lead and charged in, seeking strength in numbers. Naruto alone lingered. You cannot heal him as you did the others. Melina appeared at his side in a shower of blue light as the last of his wound stitched itself shut. He's rotted, inside and out, and for far longer. She scowled at him. He was at the epicenter of the blast that ravaged Caelid. Whatever you're plotting, it won't work. Naruto lifted his chin in mulish defiance. He was sure it was writ across his face. Won't work, she said. Wouldn't know until he tried. But first he needed Radahn's attention on him. On him, and away from everyone else. There was only one way to do such. Time to put on an act to end all acts, something he hadn't done since he was a boy. Millicent saw the look in his eye and scowled. My lord, no. Don't you dare. Too late. Radahn. Naruto stepped forward, spread his arms wide, voice echoing across the wailing dunes. I came here to face a champion. I am still waiting. Still grinning, he turned around, bent over, and slapped his flank. Come and get me. Unless you're afraid. A moment of awful silence followed. And then. The world shook with an answering roar. Someone whistled behind him. Big brass balls on this one. Naruto never saw who it was. He was already bounding forward, fixed on the melee in the distance. Millicent pelted after him at his left, and a rustle of cloth told him Melina was hovering near his right. He knew better than to tell her to step aside this time. She had done that for him once. Never again. The first blow decided the course of the battle. It also nearly killed Millicent. Naruto moved to intercept the moment Radahn closed with her, only to find that there was no need or time for him to do anything. Much to his surprise, the redhead bounded forward and leaped into the air, leaving a giant blade to sweep harmlessly underfoot. The second came racing in hot on the heels of the first, only for her to kick off its edge with both feet, using the blackened blade as a springboard to further her leap. She hung in the air for a moment in blatant defiance of gravity. Parallel with his chest, her sword arm rose. Radahn looked down. Millicent's blade swung up, sheathing Moonveil in an impossible arc, and then the blade flew free, and so did she. Radahn roared in surprise as Millicent's weapon upon him in a storm of glowing azure blades, whirling and flowing as he'd only ever seen once before. All combat ceased as she single-handedly forced him back. The ring on Naruto's finger sang in blissful harmony, bringing two words to the forefront of his mind. Waterfowl dance. Whatever it was, it put Radahn on the back leg? No, a quick glance confirmed didn't have feet. They'd long since rotted away at the ankles, leaving him to rely on his scrawny steed for locomotion. Locomotion he could not maintain as he staggered under the storm. Shoulders sagged, armor buckled beneath the onslaught of steel and blue light. Millicent didn't give him the chance to counter. She just kept moving, ripping into him as if she'd been born for this, created for nothing but this singular moment. But her stamina wasn't infinite. Radahn was a demigod. She was not. Rumbling like thunder, he warded the blows away with one sword. The other rose. Naruto saw the counter coming in the same moment that Millicent finally faltered. Trish! The tree sentinel stepped in seamlessly as the redhead fell to a knee and brandished her golden shield. Naruto stepped in behind her, swept Millicent up, and darted back. Those Starscourge greatswords descended and combat resumed. Trish ducked behind her shield, ready to weather the storm. And weather it she did. Her defenses held in the face of his fury, enduring not one, but three singular strikes that would have split a lesser warrior in half. Radahn ignored those tearing at his flesh and raised both blades high, prepared to break her guard with an overhand smash, only for both blades to smack into a pair of open palms. The mad demigod made a noise of confusion and glared down at the immutable barrier that had saved her life. Greyroll grinned up at him, exposing rows of razor-sharp teeth in a wild leer. Come! Scales sprouted from her flesh. Face a dragon. She kicked outward, staggering him. From there it all dissolved into a mad melee of blows. Naruto made the mistake of parrying a greatsword. The impact alone nearly ripped his arm from its socket and forced him to punch up with the other. Clenched knuckles barreled into Radahn's chin. His head snapped back, but still, he remained seated atop his horse and came at him again. A Rasengan put paid to that, warping his armor to tear at his flesh, but still he didn't go down. And was with that horse? The sight nearly brought the blonde up short. How on earth could a giant like Radahn ride such a scrawny steed without crushing it? His hesitation nearly cost him an arm, even then he barely got his guard up time. The Starscourge greatsword swept down, seeking his head. Giant golden palms rose to meet them, not to deflect this time, but rather to meet the blades head-on as Greyroll had. Unlike her, he caught the blades and yanked them down, wielder and all. Radahn and his mount crashed into the sand. When they tried to rise, he raised his fists and brought all his strength down on the general's back, using Kurama's paws as battering rams. He could hardly use his full form here, doing so would harm his allies. And there were many of them now, more than he could count. Here he heard Blade howl, then saw the half-wolf pounce onto the general's thigh, driving his frozen greatsword deep. Radahn roared in pain, but even as he sought to rip him apart, Greyroll rent the giant's chest with her claws, causing yet further blood loss. Millicent crouched backwards, steadied herself, then flew into a fresh flurry of blows that hammered the general's wounded back. Melina landed atop his back and drove a dagger deep, only for the general to buck and hurtle her away. A certain Jolly Jar caught her, spun around, and flung the kindling maiden back into the fray with a mighty cry. Others joined in, raining down blows on the general from all sides, chipping away at his mighty vigor. They were wearing him down. Slowly but surely. Now if they could just knock him down. And then the tempo changed. Radahn shuddered to a stop atop his tiny, aging mount, gone still as stone. Naruto swore softly, not like the look of that one bit. What in the? A low growl seemed to rattle the dunes, no, the very air itself. Radahn was still snarling when he leaped into the air. The world fell silent. Millicent looked left first. Naruto looked right. Frowned. And then he remembered to look up. Alright, where did he is that a meteor? Chapter 8, at my side. Get up. His ears were ringing. No, that wasn't it. Everything was ringing. He couldn't remember the last time someone hit him from orbit. It hurt like hell. Naruto touched one hand to the side of his head, grimacing in pain as the skin there regrew. Why were his ears ringing? Why was everything blurry? Why couldn't he think straight? He could feel someone shaking his right shoulder, hear them shouting while the earth trembled underfoot, but it all felt so distant somehow. One fist lay buried in the sand, his body down on a single knee. Even the singular act of raising his head made him feel violently ill. Had to move. Had to get up. Had to, by the log he was going to be sick. Breathe. Your eardrums were ruptured by the blast. Any chance you could fix that, Kurama? Just did. A clap of thunder rang in his head, taking the nausea with it. Dimly he became aware of the world again as he climbed to his feet. He immediately wished he hadn't. He could hear Greyroll growling and Radahn raging across the next dune, which suggested at least a few combatants had survived his landing, but then he saw them. He found Trish sprawled out in the dunes not a yard away, and her mangled shield not far from that. Her armor was caved in from a mighty blow and her helm knocked aside. By some miracle she still lived, but only just. Melina was crouched beside her with a ruined leg, forcing a flask of crimson tears to the larger woman's lips. Drink, blast you. The sentinel planted a trembling fist in the ground and punched it, but acquiesced. Naruto nearly gagged as beheld the mangled joint of the kindling Maiden's knee, the limb itself bent at an unnatural angle. How was she ignoring a wound like that? Would she heal from that? Could she heal? Not likely, not when she was using her flask on Trish. He stumbled her way and made to lay a hand on her knee, only for her to glare daggers at him. He still did despite her glare. He wouldn't forget the awful noise her leg made as it popped back into place. My injuries are of no concern. She gasped out, batting his hand away. Tend to your sword. She is in more need of your strength than I. Sword? The blonde paused as he realized they were missing someone. Wait. Where was? Good to see you awake, a weak voice whispered behind him. My lord. He found their resident redhead propped against the very same mound of weapons he'd just risen from, clutching her right arm, what remained of it. The very same limb he'd restored, now reduced once more to a ragged stump at the shoulder and an ugly tear in her collarbone. Blood flowed freely from the wound, forming a scarlet puddle beneath her. Memories rushed back. The meteor. Wrong. Radahn had been the meteor. He'd crashed down on them, a falling star, power bombing them from the upper atmosphere. She had shoved him aside at the last, saving his life. Incredulity dawned, rooting him where he stood. Why? A sword protects her lord. In any case, it's just a flesh wound. Her waxy complexion said otherwise. I've suffered worse. Her words untethered his legs, just like that found himself moving, slamming down onto his knees, pressing both hands to her gaping wound. Chakra surged out, wrapping the length of her shoulder. She didn't react to the mending energy in the least, she was just that far gone. He could feel her pulse fading, growing weaker. And with her weakness something deep inside her stirred, rising to the surface. The scarlet rot. He had suppressed it once before, but she'd not been this weak then. He could feel it in her now, an angry writhing tide, eager to bloom, to flower into new life. He shoved at it and a ghastly, oily presence touched his mind. Why do you resist? A low contralto, a woman's voice, whispered in his ear, sweeter than poisoned honey. She already belongs to me. She is mine, just as her sisters are mine, as Melnia is mine, as this world will be mine. It reminded him of Kaguya, but worse. So much worse. Why struggle fruitlessly? He kept his eyes fixed on Millicent's slowly mending collarbone, watching the wound close to the exclusion of all else. A hand took him by the chin. Millicent's hand. He didn't want to look up, for fear of what he'd find there. He tried to resist, and failed. She gazed back at him, her golden eyes a tainted pink on red, a coy smile tugging at her normally dour expression. It was a look he'd never seen her wear before. If anything it helped him distance himself from her. Something was controlling her body, no, speaking through her very soul. Something not of this world. Scram, whatever you are. Kurama rallied before he could. He's already got one passenger. Mine business is not with you, creature. 'Tis with him. We need not be enemies. Her voice dipped lower still, running silken fingers over his spine as she turned her tainted eyes back to him. Be my champion, mine dear consort. He shivered a little as her forehead kissed his, lips brushing his ear. Free me from mine lake of rot, and I shall usher in a new cycle of rebirth for this decayed world. Together, our children shall devour the very. The ring on Naruto's finger erupted into searing brilliance, warping her words into a wail of pain. Begone. He is not yours to claim. Millicent withdrew with a start, her eyes gone gold once more. Forgive me, she rasped, leaning back against the rusted weapon. I don't know what came over me, I was not myself. That's putting it lightly. Naruto had an awful inkling. That she wasn't aware of it only confirmed his suspicions. That thing, whatever was inside her, it couldn't be set free. Greyrol's scream echoed across the wailing dunes. Radahn roared back. She fell silent. They need you. Millicent's head lolled to the side. Leave me. Dread dawned and he shouted her down. Quiet, you! In that moment, Naruto felt like screaming himself. He shoved more chakra into her, and this time, she gasped. The rot receded with a snarl. He took that as a good sign. He couldn't regrow her arm in time. In his current state, he was struggling just to stop the bleeding and close the gaping wound. Every second he wasted was another in which someone might die. Even now, their survival wasn't a sure thing. Radahn howled and another cry of pain pierced the air. Panic clouded his mind, tangling his already tattered thoughts into ugly red knots. Maybe send a swarm of shadow clone. But that would mean taking his hands off Millicent, and if he did that she'd keep losing blood, and if she lost too much she'd. Allow me. Someone knelt beside him. A gentle golden glow suffused Millicent's body. Naruto's head snapped to the side, taking in the newcomer at a glance, except, she wasn't a newcomer at all. It was the woman from the plaza. The one in the robes who'd bowed to him back then. A faint golden sheen stemmed from her hands as she brought them forward against Millicent, brow writ with concentration. He felt something pushed against his chakra in that moment, strengthening his attempts at healing, doubling them up with a blessing. As he looked on, the wound finally closed, the blood within slowing to but a trickle. Well. Seems someone has a gift. The stranger granted them a tiny, tremulous smile. He didn't even know her name. I'm no fighter, M-Lord, she warbled a little, flushing prettily under his gaze. But I can at least keep your companion stable while you fight. You! Blade's body hurtled past them and crashed into Alexander, just now cresting the next rise. He heard the great jar crack as both brawlers went down. Credit where it was due, the half-wolf bounded upright and hurled himself back into the fray with nary a pause. His fellow did not. The jolly jar lay there, still as a stone, out cold. Warrior! Greyrol belted out a yelp. A little help, go. Millicent nudged him with her good arm. I'll live. Stop him. Naruto grimaced. He had to, didn't he? One way or another, someone needed to put the general down. Greyrol and Blade might well be the ones to do end Radahn if he let them be, but who was he to leave them to their fate? It hadn't been personal before. Now, after all the wounds his comrades had taken? An ember of anger kindled in his chest, righteous and powerful. Wincing at his wounds, he climbed to his feet. I'll be right back. Millicent smiled at him, his heart skipped a beat, more so at her words. Be safe. Naruto ran then, from her as much as the strange feeling in his chest. He wasn't ashamed to admit it, his mind was already elsewhere, locking down, focusing on the fight ahead. A quick step shot him over the dune, past a startled Blade, followed by that fellow with the great hammer, then the masked madman with two swords. He saw Radahn first, a strange series of what could only be described as boulders looming over his shoulders as he howled at Greyrol. That had to be Greyrol. He scarcely recognized her, covered in blood as she was, hair matted, dress in tatters. In her desperation she had nearly reverted to her draconic self, now she seemed some strange amalgamation caught between human and dragon. Even from here, the changes became apparent. Her human form stood proud and unbowed despite her wounds. Was it his imagination, or had she grown? No, she looked to be a good head taller than he remembered, more than that. She was nearly half the general's size now, if not his equal in sheer tenacity. I won't die here. She snarled, fangs flashing in the moonlight. Not yet. Not to you. In that split second of inattention, Naruto stepped in. He whistled sharply. Hey! Big guy! Radahn heard his challenge and rounded on him with a roar, brandishing his blades. Naruto let him raise them. They swung down in an overhead smash, one that became so much wind in his hair as he stepped into the good general's guard. Radahn grunted in surprise, a grunt that became a snarl as he reached up and grabbed the man's wrists. The demigod tried to pull away, of course. Tried. As in, he did not succeed. Sorry, Naruto apologized to him as much as the withered horse currently staring him the face. But this is the end for you. The beast gave a low whinny and slammed against him, to no avail. He didn't budge. It's all right, he whispered. I'll give you a long rest after this. Golden hands began to squeeze, buckling first Raiden's gauntlets and then the wrists beneath. He kept squeezing, hardening his heart to the cries of pain that followed. That plucky steed drove itself at him again and again in spite of it all, determined to protect its master. All for naught. Kurama, I've got him. A golden limb burst from his back and pinned the steed. It was the final straw. Radahn's arms spasmed and lost hold of his great swords at long last. They sheathed themselves in the sand at his feet, driven nearly to the hilts by their weight alone. How a man could carry those things, he'd no idea, let alone when they were enhanced with those rocky cragblades. Even then the general didn't give up. He reared back and brought his head smashing down in a vicious headbutt, all but flattening his poor mount against the sand to get at him. Stars flashed through his vision, but once more, he held firm. Placid red orbs gazed into eyes of maddened gold, the gaze of a starving lion longing for an end. Still he searched for some sign of sanity within, some semblance of serenity, and against all odds, the general spoke. Well, more a roar really. Millennia. Was it the eyes? Had to be the eyes. Sorry. Ain't her. You never asked for this, did you? He leaned his head against the general's and let his eyes drift shut. Maybe we could have been friends, before all this. Radahn tried to headbutt him again for it. This time he was ready for it. Still gripping the general's wrists, he released his mount, leaped up and drove a golden knee into the man's midsection. Radahn doubled over. He didn't stop there. Abandoning his hold on the man's fractured wrists, he let momentum have its day. It carried him up and over and away, but not before he got a hold of the general's crimson mane. From there, gravity did the rest. With a cry of triumph he slammed him down to the dunes, momentarily stunning him. From there he pressed his marked palm to the giant demigod's forehead and focused. Golden chakra flowed forth, lulling the. Distantly he became aware of Greyroll and the other combatants approaching. She was grinning at him, looking like a goddess of the battlefield. He waved her down with a smile and returned his attention back to his patient. Only had one shot at this. All right, big guy. If I healed a dragon, I can fix. What in the blue hell is this? He nearly recoiled what he found there. Radahn's insides were gone. His internals were a literal mass of rot soup. Nothing more. Nothing less. Of his organs, precious little remained. He'd never regrown organs before. Eyes and arms, yes. Hell, he'd brought Guy back from the very brink of death after using the 8 gates, but even that was merely a matter of reversing the damage, spurring the body's natural defenses into overtime to heal great wounds and recover that which had been lost. How did you heal that which no longer existed? Without the rot, would he even be alive? Radahn had been feasting on the rotten corpses of former friends and foes for centuries now. The rot had a hold on him unlike any other. Of those who came before him, he had precious little of his wits left, let alone his sanity in any meaningful capacity. Millicent and Greyroll had been infected to be sure, but not even poor Ixyx had fermented with this much poison. Radahn had been at ground zero when Millennia unleashed the scarlet rot. Even boosted as he was by Godric's great rune, he didn't think he could fix this. Can't I? The realization rattled him. No, he rallied. I can fix this. I can do it this, I have to. He's not like Godric. He's a good guy. He deserves to live. Dragging his chakra out, he flung it at the ailing general in a web, wrapping him in golden light beneath his armor. The rot realized what he was doing at once and clung on tenaciously, refusing to give an inch. He had to batter it back bit by bit, a craftsman chipping away at obsidian with a chisel. It was slow, murderous going. Someone shouted at him and tugged on his shoulder. He ignored them, torn between now 3 tasks at once. He wasn't simply trying to push out the infection, but heal Radahn's body and mind simultaneously. Without his organs, the good general would fall apart the moment he ripped the rot out. It didn't help that the Starscourge was fighting him every step of the way. He couldn't even blame Radahn for that. In his heart of hearts, the general had nothing left to live for. As such, he longed only for an honorable death in battle. An end to his pain. This was not that. It was slow. Agonizing. Probably felt like torture. Only natural he'd rail against it with every instinct he had. If only he could make him see. He was just trying to help. He didn't want to hurt him. Finish me. Please. The world went white. Naruto closed his eyes against it. Kurama's voice pierced the veil, returning him to reality. You need to stop. This is beyond you. He's breaking free. Sweat beaded down his brow as he grit his teeth. I can still do this, damn it. Naruto. You may be able to heal his body, but you can't make a madman sane. I've almost got it. Just give me a few more minutes. And then Radahn bucked under his palm. Kurama yanked him back. It saved his life. A massive fist shot up and struck them in the chest, fracturing 3 ribs to launch him into a dune. He kicked upright in an instant, but it was too late. The moment Radahn moved, everyone went mad and fell upon him en masse. In that madness, someone struck true. Naruto was never sure who. Only that they did. Radahn flailed about himself with grasping hands, but not enough. He took wounds. Someone slashed out his right eye. An agonized cry pierced the air. The good general jerked upright, then stumbled on rotten legs. He fell forward, catching himself with both palms, as his withered mount collapsed beneath him. Naruto swore in the same breath as Greyroll. Who did that, fool of a tarnished blade lowered his blade. They've done it now. Radahn nudged his faithful steed once more, trying to spur him on. The poor beast slumped to the sands with an exhausted whine. A giant hand descended, cradling its exhausted body. Nursing the grievous wound in its belly. Trembling fingers set it aside in the rot-ridden sands. He gave it another desperate nudge, making a pitiful noise. The withered beast managed to raise its head a fraction of a foot, then fell still. It did not move again. He lowered his head and sniffed once. Sobbed, softly. Leo, Nard. His horse didn't move. Not the, please, not you, too. The stars sang a mournful dirge overhead. I think we've just made a terrible mistake. Leonard wouldn't move. Radahn's rotten mind struggled to make sense of it all, to no avail. It didn't make a lick of sense. How had this happened? Why wouldn't his beloved steed move? Radahn didn't know what to do. Not without his horse, without Leonard. What was he to do now? He wanted to die. He needed to die. A worthy death was all he sought. And yet, these monsters had slain his horse, all that he had left of his family. An answer came to him then. Kill them. Kill them all. Okay. Radahn dragged himself upright, and fell off his steed. On ruined legs did he right himself. Why? His neck craned back, a single golden eye gazing at the moon high above. Heavy hands reached up for it as though to grasp it, and failed. A mournful howl escaped him then, a wail of grief and despair, of a good man who had tried to do right and failed, a tortured wretch who had finally lost one too many. In his heart of hearts, Naruto heard his voice then. You were, at my side all along, all this time. And so the general spoke. Slowly, haltingly, but words emerged nevertheless. My oldest friend, my dearest companion. A shiver shot down their spines. Taken from me. His head bent low as his helm fell away, leaving the flowing crimson mane of his hair to tumble down his back. Oh, Leonard. He rumbled, jaws parting, setting teeth to flesh. Lend me thy strength once more. Naruto turned his head away as Radahn fed upon his horse like a starving dog. Devoured its corpse, marrow and flesh and bone, all. And as he fed, he healed. Radahn pushed himself upright on rotting legs. Gravity magic flared beneath them, forming boots of hardened stone around his ankles. He stood tall, wounds closing, spears falling out his ruined back. His hands snapped open. Once more did the Starscourge greatswords fly into his waiting palms, bathed in baleful light. Yet now there was a hint of something else to them. Darker. Tainted. Rotten. You took the last of my family. Uncaring of his bloody visage, he rose. The only thing that still mattered to me. His voice gained strength as he spoke, spurred on by the pain of loss. You wretched tarnished. When the Starscourge raised his gaze, there was a frightful glimmer in his eye. Rotten his body may well be, but a shard of his self remained awakened now, spurred on by the pain of loss. His ruined eye wept rot, trailing crimson tears as he raised his blades high. Starscourge Radahn died in that instant. In his place, Radahn the Rotten was born. Let it all rot. He rumbled. I care not anymore. Let the heavens quake, let the stars cry. Let this wretched world die. Lionel and Okina never saw the blow that slew them. One minute they stood there balking at the reinvigorated general. In the next, a star smashed down upon them, hurtling them back to their respective worlds in a shower of golden light. Tragoth survived by dint of his superior armor alone, yet even he found himself hammered down, unable to rise. Radahn took full advantage and brought his blades crashing down. The severed halves of the Horned Knight's spirit crumbled into dust. With his passing, so too were their numbers cut in half. And then he turned to them. I will have each and every one of your heads. Now you've done it. Blade hefted his great sword with a forlorn sigh. There's no reasoning with him now. Me? Greyroll hissed back at the wolf. 'Twas not my blade that slew his steed. Blame the bloody swordsman for the deed. Radahn chose his target and lunged with a bestial howl. Greyroll backpedaled. Naruto leaped forward himself, knowing he'd be too late. Radahn struck. Blood spattered the sands. Those deadly Starscourge greatswords bit deep into the dirt as Greyroll flitted out of harm's way. She took flight, borne aloft now by a pair of towering wings. Black viscera spattered the sands, her shoulders even now bleeding from their sudden emergence. Silhouetted against the moon, she held up a clawed hand to beseech the heavens. Sparks danced at her fingertips, scarlet sparks. Enough! There was something off to her voice now as well, as if another, far greater presence were speaking through her. Ye dare make me exert myself, you mongrel! His sixth sense shrieked a warning well before Kurama balked. Back! Now! I am Greyroll. Mother of dragons. Child of the great Lord Placidusax. Do you hear? Eyes wild, she cast her arm forward, a bolt of purest light manifesting in her offhand. You are beneath me. I am a dragon, you dull creature. He made a blind swipe for her ankle, which only earned him her scorn. And I will suffer your insolence no more. In a shower of purple gravity magic, Radahn took flight, actual flight, to meet her challenge. Flight does not make thee a dragon. A wordless roar was his answer. Greyroll scoffed and cast the bolt down with a contemptible flick of her wrist. It skewered the bereaved berserker in the chest, aborting his short-lived charge. Momentum speared him down to the dunes. She landed atop him not a heartbeat later, teeth gone sharp, gaze ablaze. A hand reared back smashed down atop her crimson spear. The world boiled red. Naruto flung up an arm against it, even then the resultant eruption of heat and light nearly blinded him for a moment. Since when can she do that? That's not her strength. Kurama jabbed him with a paw. Can't you feel it? She's channeling it from something else, someone else. Maybe so, but it didn't change what he'd just seen. Whoever was empowering her was strong, but not strong enough. He glimpsed the two titans in the smoke. A tail had bloomed from Greyroll's back to ensnare Radahn by the waist, reeling him as one might a fish. As he looked on, she grabbed the general, all but mounting him in her fury to get at him. Mine is the true strength of dragons. Flame flickered behind her teeth and she leaned in, as though to kiss him. Care for a taste? Full lips parted in a scream, one that sounded more beast than woman. From her cry, golden fire was born. There was no chance to evade. No time to dodge. Greyroll all but embraced Radahn and breathed naked napalm into his face, scalding his visage, his being, his very soul. Radahn roared into it and lashed out with both feet, catching her center mass. Naruto heard the awful crack of bone. The startled dragoness hurtled away with a yelp. She was only just rising when a star fell from the sky and smote her into the sands. Well, she's out. Blade set his great sword in the sand. Finish him, won't you? He's suffered enough. Naruto stepped forth, only to dither at the last second. He'd gone into this battle intending to save Radahn. To help him, as he had so many others. Now their forces were down to 2, and the general was getting back up. Slowly to be sure, but the burned hulk was still very much alive. Any moment now, and he'd be upon them. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, fingernails biting down until they drew blood. How had it come to this? In another life, another story, he could have saved him. He knew it. He should have saved him. But if he made one slip here, one mistake, it was over. There was no one left to fight. Fate had conspired against him, and for once, he didn't know how to turn the tables. They'd simply run out of time. Even if he managed to save him, Radahn wouldn't thank him for it as he was now. He'd hate him for it. Curse him. Try to kill him. But still, not everyone can be saved, Naruto. They should be. That was why he'd chosen to stay here. Angry tears stung at his eyes. Why does it have to be me? Blade heaved a sigh and touched a hand to his chest. His palm came away soaked with blood. Because I can't fight that thing. I can't kill Lady Runni's brother. Naruto felt his hackles rise. Wasn't she that witch who met him at the fire? Runni? I know that name. Slip of the tongue, mate. The half-wolf looked away with a wince. Don't dwell on it. A hand clasped his shoulder. He's right, young chum. The deed needs to be done. Naruto nearly slapped his forehead. At this point, he didn't know if he wanted to laugh or cry. Why had the bloody Castellan joined the battle? No, of course he had. Life just loved its little surprises. Of course Jiren would be here to see it all end. He shouldn't have expected any less of the odd duck. He's fought long and hard, he has. The man's mask betrayed nothing when he looked to him, but his emotions shone through it all the same, ringing true. If there was any way to save him, we would have found it by now. Send him to his rest. It had to be him, didn't it? I was supposed to save him. He croaked out. I still want to. You tried, lad. Jiren clapped him on the back. That's what matters. Ask yourself this. If the general was in his right mind, would he be happy with what he's become? Naruto knew the answer. He stepped forward with a heavy heart. Radahn rounded on him, brandishing his blades with a braying roar. An impossibly fast fist snapped into his chin and sent him sprawling onto his back. Credit where it was due, it didn't stop him. He lumbered upward. A rousing roundhouse smashed him down. His swords swept forth in a black blue and were summarily ripped from his grasp. Bones broke. Blood and fingers flew through the air. He didn't use Godric's axe, not once. He beat Radahn the Rotten down with his fists alone and nothing else. Blade whistled behind him. So that's what it looks like. A fight between two demigods. He still didn't consider himself a demigod. No matter what they said. Naruto stalked after the day's general, trying to steel himself. He'd already made the mistake of underestimating Radahn once, and his allies had paid dearly for his arrogance. That wouldn't happen again. No. Never again. Mercy meant nothing here. Whatever state Radahn was in, he'd gone well beyond help. There was only one course left to him. I can't do it. The words escaped him, a low rasp as the wind keened anew. I don't think I can save you. Don't you want me to save you? Radahn only roared at the moon. Give him peace. Naruto's palms snapped out as he snarled, Rasengan spiraling in hand. Kurama's cloak blazed about him and fed still more energy to the maelstrom. It grew large within his grasp. Larger now. Largest, until it loomed over the general himself. Impossible to miss. Even if he dodged the first strike, the follow-up would surely finish him off. Even now he hoped against hope. Last chance. His voice cracked. Stand down. Don't make me do this. Perhaps Radahn knew that, because he didn't bring the stars crashing down upon him as he had the others. As he looked on, the general's shoulders slumped, his very being sagging in exhaustion, bone deep. But only for a moment. Then he threw himself forward, barreling down at him in one last wild, suicidal charge. Naruto's arm fell with a thunderclap and a cry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Let there be light. Runni woke from her deep slumber with a frightful start. She felt it, then. His spirit passing in the night. A tear ran down her cheek. Radahn. Melina felt the battle end. It came not with a whisper, but a roar. She heard the keening of the wind, and saw what followed. Stars raced by, freed at last from the general's grasp. One hurtled into the distance and rent a mighty explosion upon the lands between. The kindling maiden fought down a wince. She knew full where it had fallen, such was the knowledge granted to her by her mother. Such were the trappings of fate, and likewise, they were well known to her. With this, Runni's schemes would begin to move once more. But now was not the time for such thoughts, because she saw him. Naruto crested the dune, Greyroll leaning heavily against him, with Blade and that foolish Castellan not far behind. She paid the latter little mind, because you see, she saw them. Radahn's great swords, shrunken to fit the blonde's back. Likewise, she beheld the general's great rune etched into the blonde's right arm. Full of lively vigor it was, burning a bright baleful amber over his armor. Orange. The sight drew a bitter laugh from her. It would be orange. Of all the colors. The irony wasn't lost on her. Radahn had ever loved the sight of a sunset, that great big oaf. Mastering her emotions, she wiped a lone tear from her eye and forced herself to rise on trembling legs. The battle is over, then. Naruto laid Greyroll down, ignoring the latter's angry growl. Blade plunked down beside her with a weary sigh. Still he said not a word. Blank blue eyes met hers. It was as if he didn't see her. No, he did see her, he simply stared right through her. He looked tired. Hollowed out from the inside. Dread dawned. Had the ruinous rot in Radahn taken hold of him as well? Nay, she didn't sense such. He must be tired. Surely that was all, unless... Realization struck like a thunderclap. Naruto had failed to save Radahn. He'd been so confident, so certain, so sure that he would. And in the end, he was left with no choice but to slay the madman. For once, she'd been right. She had proven him wrong. It should have been a pleasant feeling, but it wasn't. Where was the pride she'd expected? It tasted like ashes in her mouth. No, this wouldn't do. Victory might yet defeat him. Break him. This could not pass. He had 2 great runes in his. The damage he could cause with such was unimaginable. Only once before had a tarnished accomplished such, and never in such a short time. Vike had languished for years to reach this point. Naruto had done all this in less than a month. If he broke now, if he went mad, all her efforts would be for naught, or so she told herself. Something else nagged at Melina. She refused to acknowledge it. Are you happy now? A little voice cooed in her ear. She wasn't. Not at all. Melina stepped to him quickly, took a handkerchief from her pocket, and used it wiped a bit of blood from his face. You fought well. It could not have ended any other way. It was the wrong thing to say, she regretted it at once. Something hot and angry burned in his eyes. Yet for all his ire, he said not a word. For a moment, just a moment, she felt the icy touch of fear. He looked well and truly furious with her. Indeed he did. Jiren buelled between them with a merry laugh and slung an arm around them both in a hearty embrace, shattering the impasse. A finer fight I've never seen in all my days. Those burly limbs drew them closer than she would have liked, leaving their faces nearly parallel with one another as he squeezed them senseless. Come, let us tend to our wounded. Then we shall make merry. Blade thumped the ground with the flat of his sword. A banquet, then? Suits me just fine. Greyroll raised a trembling fist from where she lay. Will there be wine? As much as you can drink, my lady dragon. He dipped a hand to the flask at his belt, and the moment Melina took her chance to squirm free. It shall be a feast unlike any other. As she looked on, he poured it out on the sands. A toast. For our new general. Trish and Blade barked a pained laugh where they lay. Naruto's head whipped around with an audible creak as he tore himself free of Jiren. Excuse you, you got blood in your ears, lad? The Castellan chortled behind his mask. You slew a demigod in honorable combat. There's no one better to take his place. Melina noted the curious look of panic in the blonde's eyes just then. So too did Jiren, because he barreled onward before he could recover. If you truly wish to set things right with the rot, then the lads and I would be happy to have you. Still chuckling, he buckled the flask back to his belt and clapped him on the arm once more. Give it some thought. Much to Melina's relief, Naruto only made an irritated noise. I'll think about it, that's all I ask. His piece said, the Castellan sauntered away, waving as he did. It will take some time to prepare another festival, of course. I'll send word when we're ready. Feel free to stay at the castle for as long you please in the meantime. Greyroll tried to rise. Naruto yanked her back down. Her legs flailed in the air as she whined. But Wei Yian, you're already punch-drunk as is. Blue eyes rolled in mild exasperation. Take a nap. She rolled over to glare golden daggers at him. Who are you to command me? A blonde brow arched her way. She quivered under his stoic stare. Irk. Very well, I shall, yes, I'll just rest, shall I? That's what I thought. When his gaze swung back to her, Melina couldn't help but squirm. He looked at her for a long moment, letting her shrivel under his sight like a naughty child. She forced herself to meet his stare. Paw! If he thought she'd roll over like that dragon woman, he had another thing coming. She would not be cowed by strength alone. I've been thinking like a ninja, he said at last. Time to start thinking like a tactician. Everyone almost died today because I rushed in. She felt the estranged need to comfort him. They didn't, but they almost did. He clicked his tongue. That's on me. I need to take responsibility for that. Melina blinked. Was that a flicker of pride she felt just now? No. Nay. Surely not. She shoved it down. It lingered still, smoldering as Naruto walked away. Exasperated and exhausted, she slumped back to the sand. Where was he off to now? Numb and drained, Naruto finally traipsed back to Millicent. He found her slumbering peacefully, mangled arm bound by a crimson tourniquet as the nameless maiden fussed over her. It was a far cry from the state he'd left her in. When he touched 2 fingers to her throat, he felt her pulse come through, steady and strong. Shame about her arm, though. He'd have to see his way to healing it again, or maybe finding her a prosthetic. Thoughts for later. Right now, her health mattered more. How is she? Stable. The nameless maiden bowed her head as he knelt beside her. That was a very brave thing she did. Yeah. Unbidden, he found himself reaching out, pushing a strand of red hair from Millicent's eyes. She's a stubborn one. Her nose wrinkled in sleep and he released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Let her sleep. She's earned her rest. If she died because of him, no, he didn't want to think about that. There had been enough death this day. Beside him, the maiden took a breath, wriggled a little, then looked to him. Brave tarnished, might I have a moment of your time? Naruto looked away, and bristled when he saw Radahn looming over her. His shoulders tensed. How? A blink, and the general was gone. He scrubbed at his eyes. Seeing things. Had to be. If it's a reward you're after, I don't have much on me. 'Tis not a reward I seek. When he looked back, the maiden was in the process of removing her bloodied mantle. Rich dark hair spilled out, complementing pale golden eyes. He'd never seen a more striking combination. It helped distract him from what he'd just seen. Right, don't think about it. Focus on her. That'll help. My name is Theralina. She stood and introduced herself properly with a polite bow. I believe you are the one that I have been searching for. He blinked, not quite comprehending. For me? What for? She dipped another skittish curtsy. Why, to be your maiden, of course. Blade held out a laugh where he lay. Naruto could feel Melina glaring a hole between his shoulders, waiting for his answer. You want to be my maiden? A touch of disbelief must have bled through his words, because she seemed to shrink at his remark. You must be joking. Oh. Theralina hung her head. Gravity itself seemed to suck her down. I see. Yes, of course. It was foolish of me to say such a thing. Her shoulders shook and her chest convulsed once. I suppose you're right. After all, who would want a useless wretch like me? Bitter laughter tumbled past her lips. I'm no warrior. I can't even swing a sword. All I can do is heal. She looked so small and lost in that instant. Damn it, don't you do it. He just couldn't help himself. Hey, hey. He waved his right hand furiously. I didn't say no. Why me? Theralina's head snapped up, red-rimmed eyes regarded him, wet with unshed tears. You're having me on, aren't you? Not about this. You're the strongest warrior I've ever met. She sniffled a little, somewhat chagrined by his remark. Yet you lack the arrogance that often heralds such strength. Her hands came up, ringing themselves against one another as she rambled on. Not only that, you're the first tarnished to hold 2 great runes since Vike himself. You seem fair without being foolish, kind without the naivete that plagues the most gentle souls. And, she looked away, wrinkling her little button nose in naked embarrassment. You care for your companions. Her gaze raved over the motley crew of his allies, acknowledging them each in turn. Even a wretch like me can see that. You'd gladly give your life for them. Any of them? Well, I would, but I'm pretty sure there are plenty of other fish in the sea. You're the one I want. She clasped her hands before her face. It has to be you. No one else will do. No one else. How in blazes did you argue with a remark like that? You didn't. Naruto looked left. Naruto looked right. No one came to his aid. Melina's gonna kill me. When he turned to look her way, he thought she just might. Her good eye met his in silent judgment. Her mouth opened. Closed now, as she saw the resolve in his gaze. Rather than protest, she huffed and vanished in a swirl of blue mist. Her presence lingered nearby, a silent and sullen shadow, sulking at his decision. There would be hell to pay for this later. He just knew it. And yet. All right. It was almost painful to see Theralina jump at that. If you want to follow me. Yes. He was still speaking when Theralina hit his chest, an arrow loosed from a bow. Her arms locked tight around him and held on for dear life. He could have pried her off, shoved her away in an instant, he knew he could have, but it would have been like kicking a puppy. Couldn't do it. I finally have a purpose. Thank you. 1,000 thank yous, my lord. Bright, golden eyes shone up at him, framed by a cherubic smile. That you'll not regret this, I swear by the fingers. I'm sure we'll get along splendidly. Well, at least she had spirit. Still, for better or worse, Radahn was gone, which left him with another matter to deal with, one yet unresolved. Now where in blazes had his clones gotten off to in Caelid? A shadow clone had wandered too far. He knew he had, just as he knew the boss was gonna be all sorts of angry once he finally dispelled himself. He'd seen a lot. Done a lot, too. In all likelihood his memories were gonna give the original a mighty migraine he'd not soon forget. It wasn't his fault. He'd been following orders, him and his brothers, trying to clean up Caelid as best they could with their limited resources. The boss had put him in charge of a sizable squad, even reinforced him with extra chakra to make sure he wouldn't pop in one hit like the rest of the lads. Not much, but enough. As a result of that generous patronage, it was smooth sailing for a while there. They'd torn through a great many beasties, nabbed a bit of loot, even managed to rescue the odd soldier here and there. Yes sir, it was smooth sailing indeed. Until they blundered into that rotten dragon. Things went downhill after that. They'd sent a runner back to the boss of course, only for said dragon to take notice. He'd taken a hit covering for him. Instinct, really. They were just clones. Doppelgangers. Pale imitations of the genuine article. They didn't matter. He'd fully expected to pop like a balloon when OL Ugly swatted him with his tail. But he hadn't now, had he? Instead he'd awoken in some god-forsaken rainy peninsula, with nothing but a trail of bodies to follow. With a long-suffering sigh he continued down the road. The boss is gonna kill me for this. Irina waited for her death. She knew it was coming, could feel it in her bones. How long had she been sitting here by the wayside, waiting for an end? Minutes? Hours? Days, now? Her stomach was twisting something terrible, but she had exhausted her meager rations long ago. Her poor eyesight availed her not, her sense, even less so. The night was dark and cold, and the rain did precious little for the thin shift she wore. Yet where could she go? Fear held her in thrall. If she were to stand up and walk, she might well blunder into more trouble than she could handle. Without her guards to protect her, she would surely be slain. Yes, better to sit here where it was safe. All she could do was sit and wait for her end. Wait for father to come, even if that too terrified her. Wait? Was that sound like footsteps? Hello? She called out feebly into the rain. Is somebody there? The shuffling footsteps stopped. Oh, she hoped it wasn't another misbegotten. If so she'd sealed her fate. No, wait. Now they were coming closer. Her heart skipped a single, frantic beat. This was it, then. The end. She would die here, alone and forgotten, and father would never know. Thankfully the voice that answered was delightedly human. What are you doing way out here? You'll catch a cold. Oh. Oh, my. His hands were so very warm. She felt like as if she were melting away in his palms. No. Nay. Focus, Irina. Never mind that. Might I bend your ear for a moment, please? She stumbled over the words hastily before her composure could forsake her further. My name is Irina. I've escaped from Castle Morn to the south. The servants there have rebelled, you see. She felt his hands tighten around hers, but still, he didn't speak. That was good, wasn't it? He'd given her a chance to continue. I can't be sure what it is, exactly, my eyesight's been weak since birth, you see. In her hysteria, she almost giggled at the poor choice of words. But I swear, I heard frightful howling from all over. How did you get away? His voice was low, soothing even. I saw the dead guards. By dint of luck and little else, she wanted to say, yet she stilled her tongue. My good father secreted me out of the castle, but decided himself to stay. He says, she swallowed once to master the surge off ear that followed, it's his duty to stay as commander. That he couldn't come with me just yet. Her visitor made a noise of anger. Duty over his daughter. That ain't right, he agreed. Thank goodness. This might make things a bit easier, given what she was building up to. I fear it's not any different at Castle Morn. Irina dared to thread her fingers through his, improper though such a thing might be. Please, I implore you, would you do me a service? Pretty sure I know what it is. I implore you, take this letter to my father. Taking one hand from his, she retrieved her handkerchief and the words written within, then presented it to him. Let him know that my sole wish is that he escape from that wretched place, even if his honor is the price. Please. Here at last, her courage faltered, and her voice with it. I just want him to be safe. A weighty pause followed. Slowly, tenderly, he took the handkerchief with her. I'll do it. But I ain't leavin' ya here. You're coming with me. Whatever did he mean by that? She would be useless in a fight and Ogatsu scurrying her like a princess. Good sir, where are you taking me? Someplace safe. No taking it back now. Shut up and accept my generosity. The clone stomped down the road with sound and aplomb, carrying his charge, face carved from granite. First things first. That castle could wait a while longer. Irina's health mattered more. Best get her out of the rain. And after that, he had to let the boss know what was happening here. Surely he was having an easier time of things, wherever he was, right? Surely he must be. Have you come to visit again, my dear? Fia patted the empty space beside her, pale fingers creasing the bed in tender invitation. She'd removed her hood and revealed her face to him. Warm firelight from the hearth danced across her lovely visage, casting it molten shades of amber and golden, seeming to set her very body aflame. For some reason, that last thought terrified him. The idea of someone burning alive, why was he even thinking about that? And so he watched her like a hawk from the doorway, unwilling to approach any further than he already had. I don't think that's a good idea. Why ever not? Her smile was guileless as the grave. I mean no harm. No harm, she said. That was precisely what worried him. This was not what he'd expected to find upon returning to the round table. He'd made the rounds upon his arrival, just to let everyone know he was still alive, to help the girls settle in and convalesce from their wounds. He wasn't sure what drew him here, not when he still needed to call on Roderica and Hyuk. But he'd been drawn here nonetheless. Now he found himself hesitating like some skittish fox. Upon further reflection, he found an inkling why. I will take you in my arms as often as you need. Was that what had urged him here? A need for comfort. Someone to talk to. There's nothing wrong with that. You're human. Ain't wrong to seek a little solace. It was weak of him, gushing to a perfect strange. He walked Fia's way on leaden legs anyway. Sat beside her. Leaned in. His head touched her shoulder. I killed someone today. The words tumbled out of him, and once he started, he couldn't top. Someone who didn't deserve it. Someone who should have lived. It's my fault. She touched a hand to his head. Did you try to save him? Not hard enough. Naruto looked up and saw Radahn again. Smaller perhaps, but still every bit the great general he'd face. The man's specter, he could only assume it was such, smiled at him. Why wasn't he angry? He should hate him. And yet his specter only smiled. He looked calm. Happy. At peace, despite all the suffering he'd endured. Hale and healthy, he gazed upon him without so much as an ounce of hate in his heart. His lips moved in his open helm, but no sound emerged. What was he saying? What was he trying to tell him? It was too much, the shame and the deed alike. Naruto couldn't bear it, and averted his eyes. I surmised as much. Fia's gaze traveled to Radahn's rune, even now pulsing painlessly in his right arm. This act pained you, did it not? You are a gentle soul. You do not enjoy hurting others, nor do you kill for the sake of killing. True words. More than he dared admit. He bobbed his head, not trusting himself to speak. Just a moment. Fia waved her hand. The doors to her chamber eased shut, sealing off all sounds. Ordinarily, Naruto would have taken issue with that, but he was just so terribly weary. There is nothing wrong with kindness, my dear. When she turned, taking his face in her hands, he couldn't bring himself to resist. Empathy is what makes our kind strong. Her forehead touched his, imparting yet more words with her meager blessing. Never forget that. I am sure that you did all you could. If there had been a way to save him, surely you would have found it. There should have been a way. He glared down into her lap. If I'd just had more time. Time is something everyone craves, even we tarnished. Again with that moniker. It was the final straw. Naruto surged upright. I ain't a tarnished. His fist flashed back, obliterating a nearby bookshelf. I ain't a demigod either. He brought his arms crashing down again, splintering the floor. Fia didn't flinch, even then. I'm trying so hard to fix things, and I thought I was doing a good job, but a good man died today because I wasn't strong enough. When he looked at his hands now, he couldn't help but see blood on them. So much blood. I almost lost Millicent and everyone. I can't. I understand. He rounded on her with wild eyes. How? I know what it is to lack strength when needed most. Fia met his gaze evenly, a hint of pain still burning through her bright eyes. I know what it means to fail. Just as I know you aren't tarnished. Fia rose to meet him. As I have known from the moment I first embraced you. She met him halfway, took him by the hands, and tugged him back to her bed despite his outburst. Even so, I will hold you as long as need be. With that simple act of kindness, the dam broke. Naruto buckled against her with a sob. Fia's slim arms enfolded him, holding him close. And he wept. It's not fair. That's it for part 3. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.